Good Lord. What would your old man or that damn prig of a brother of yours say if they could see you now? A monologue artist at the theater was terrible enough, but this is the ultimate. There was a flash of something white and sparkling within 6 inches of his face, a sharp click, and an eye looked directly into his own across a short steel barrel. "Leave!" The word was like the sound of a bullet being fired. "But Lizzie, leave, you coward, or I swear to God if you stay I will kill you." With a sharp jab of the spur, his horse leaped halfway across the road, a black prancing silhouette against the intense brightness. She saw the rider raise one arm and strike the animal's flank with a stinging whip. The next moment, they disappeared into the darkness. For a moment she leaned against the shack, weak and almost fainting from the aftermath, her face incredibly pale. Then she took a long, deep breath, gathered her skirts tightly with one hand, and fearlessly plunged into the pitch-black alley. Chapter 13. Mercedes stood in the shade of the towering hillside, the single beam of light shining from an uncovered window, only faintly revealing her slim figure in its red drapes. No other glimmer broke the prevailing darkness of the night, and the only noticeable sound was that of horses' hooves fading in the distance. The girl wasn't crying, although one of her hands covered her eyes, and her chest rose and fell with heavy breaths. She stood still, unmoving, the strange glow making her seem unreal, like a perfectly sculpted statue, an artist's vision carved in colored stone. Suddenly she jumped back from that revealing ray of light and crouched low at the corner of the house, resembling a frightened wild animal, her head bent forward, listening intently. There was a clearly noticeable movement in the darkness, the sound of an approaching footstep and quick breaths, and finally a shadow came into view. The watcher jumped to her feet, somewhat irritated. "Ah, so it was you, miss," she exclaimed, her voice revealing her emotion. "You, who come like this tonight. Wow. Why are you following me like this? By all the saints, you have to tell me that. You want him too? You want to take everything away from me?" The visitor, startled by this sudden challenge, stood before her trembling with nervous excitement from her journey, yet her eyes remained determined. "You recognize me," she responded quickly, reaching out and touching the other with one hand, as if to make sure she was actually there. "Then for God's sake, let's not waste time arguing. I didn't make this trip without a purpose." "He, you say? Who is he? Who was it that rode away from here just now? Not Farnham?" Mercedes laughed a bit uneasily, her eyes suddenly cast down under the other's anxious gaze. "Oh, no, miss," she softly answered. "It surprises me a lot that you don't know. It was Mr. Brown." Miss Ornish firmly grasped her shoulder. "Brown!" she exclaimed eagerly. "Stutter Brown? Oh, call him back. Can't you call him back?" The young Mexican shook her head, her white teeth shining as she freed her shoulder from the fingers holding it. "You're too late, miss," she replied, sweetly confident. "He has already gone to the Little Yankee. But he spoke a lot to me first." "Much about what?" "Well, he said he loves me. He said it straight, like it was what he meant." "Oh. Yes, miss. He didn't even talk funny. Maybe he was so excited he forgot how, hey? And what do you think he said then to Mercedes, huh?" The other shook her head, undecided, hesitating about her own intentions. "He asked me if I would marry him. Yes, what do you think of that, me? Mercedes Morales, the dancer at the Gaiety. He asked me if I would marry him." "Oh, Mother of God." The young American stared at her animated face, suddenly intrigued by her womanly interest. "And what did you say?" Mercedes stomped her foot angrily on the hard ground, her eyes shining like burning embers. "You ask what I say? Saints of God, what could I say? He was a good man, that Mr. Brown, but I was not a good woman. I didn't tell him that, no, I was ashamed. I turned red, white, I could hardly speak at all. My heart was pounding so hard I thought maybe it would choke me up here. But I said no. I said no once, twice, 3 times. I told him he was a big fool to think like that of me. I told him to go away and find a woman of his own race, a good woman. I told him it could never be me, no, never." "Then you do not love him?" The puzzled dancer hesitated, her long eyelashes lowered and outlined against her cheeks. Love. That was not a nice word as it came to me. I don't know very well just what. Maybe if I don't love him, I'll marry him, yes. I won't care then. I'll make him suffer, but not care, isn't that so? Anyway, what do you call that? I respect this Mr. Brown very much, very much. Maybe that lasts longer than love, who knows? Scarcely understanding this peculiar explanation, Alyssa Ornish's first thought was that the girl had chosen wrong, that she had aligned herself with evil. "You mean you will go back to Biff Farnham?" she asked, her tone filled with horror. Mercedes straightened up quickly, her young, expressive face filled with a new passion, which struggled almost in vain to be expressed through her lips. "Go back to that man," she gasped. "Me? Good heavens. And do you think I would do that after Mr. Brown asked me to be his wife? Blessed Mary, what do you think I am? You think I don't feel, don't care? I go back to that Farnham? It would not be no. No. I told him that much, and he got angry. I don't care, I like that. I don't love him, never. I was sold to him for money, like sheep. But I learned to hate him, to kill." The deep glow of the black eyes softened, and her head slowly dropped until it touched the other's extended arm. "But this Mr. Brown, he was not that kind. He asked me to marry him. He said he didn't care what I had been, only he loved me, and he would be good to me always. I was hungry for that, miss, but I said no, no, no. It was not for me, never. I sent him away so sorry, and then I cried when I heard his horse go out there. It was like he stepped on me. It hurt that way. Maybe I don't love him, but I know he was a good man and he loved me. It was an honor when he asked me that, and now I will be a good woman because a good man loves me. Holy Mother, it will be easy now that he wanted to marry me." Impulsively, Alyssa Ornish, her own eyes moist, held the other, sobbing like a child within the clasp of sympathetic arms. There was instantly formed between them a new bond, a new feeling of awakened womanhood. Yet even as her fingers continued to stroke the disheveled hair softly, there flashed across her mind a recurring memory of her purpose, the necessity for immediate action. Not for an instant longer did she doubt the complete honesty of the other's frank avowal, or question the propriety of requesting her aid in thwarting Farnham. She held the slight, quivering figure back so that she might gaze into the uplifted, questioning face. "Mercedes, yes, yes, I understand it all," she cried eagerly. "But we cannot talk about it any longer now. It is a wonderful thing, this love of a good man, but we are wasting time that may mean life or death to others, perhaps even to him. Listen to what I'm telling you. Farnham has already gone to the Little Yankee and taken a group of thugs with him. They left San Juan on horseback over 30 minutes ago. He threatened me first and bragged that Mr. Carlton was out there and that I was too late to warn him of danger. Oh, girl, you understand what that means. You know him well. You must realize what he is capable of doing. I came here as quickly as possible in the dark." She shuddered, glancing back over her shoulder. "Every step was terrifying, but I didn't know anyone who could help me. But you know the way to the Little Yankee, and we must get there before sunrise, even if we have to crawl." All of the savage, untamed nature in the other person's face became apparent. "What did he say? Mr. Farnham, what did he say he would do?" "He said dynamite doesn't reveal secrets, but sometimes it kills more than just the intended target." Mercedes' hand went to her head as if in pain, and she stepped back, half crouching in the light like a fierce cat. "He said that? The man said that? Holy angels. He was the devil, but I became the devil too. Ah, now I'll play his game, and we'll see who wins. The Little Yankee is 3 miles away, señorita, and the road is rough. Very rough. But I know it, and we'll get there before daybreak. I'm sure we can do it, bueno." She grabbed the other person's arm, now fully alert, her small body trembling with intense excitement. "Come, I'll show you. Look, he was my pony, It makes me laugh to know that Mr. Farnham gave him to me. Now I'll make him regret it. Goodness, it's what you call the way of the world, the adventure, isn't that right? You ride the pony, miss. I walk and lead him. Yes, yes, you're more tired than Mercedes. I dance, never tire in the legs. Then I find the way easier on foot in the dark, see? You ride well, hey? He jumps a little maybe, but he's a very nice pony, and I won't let him run. No, the other way, miss, like the man rides. Poof. It's no harm in the dark. All right, now we go to surprise Mr. Farnham. She led confidently forth as she spoke, moving with perfect confidence down the uneven trail skirting the bank of the creek, her left hand firmly holding the pony's bit, the other shading her eyes as if to help choose a path through the darkness. It was a rough, uneven, winding road they followed, apparently not often used, littered with loose stones and protruding roots. Yet, after a moment of fierce but useless rebellion, the lively Mustang calmed down and carefully picked his way through the debris, obedient as a dog to his mistress's soft voice. The challenges of moving forward were too complex to allow for much conversation, and neither made much effort to speak. Both focused on the need for speed. Balancing on the saddleless back of the pony, her worried gaze on the dimly visible, slender figure walking steadily ahead, Alyssa Ornish began to dread the prospect of meeting Carlton under these circumstances again. What would he naturally think? He could hardly interpret her actions as anything other than showing deep personal interest, and she instinctively avoided such a revelation, fearing his gaze, his words of welcome, his expressions of surprised gratitude. The awkwardness, the likely embarrassment involved, became more and more apparent as she looked ahead to that meeting. If possible, she would gladly step aside and allow the other person to deliver the warning message alone. However, despite Mercedes's obvious interest in Brown and her growing dislike of Farnham, Alyssa couldn't fully trust her alone just yet. Moreover, she had no valid excuse for her sudden departure, and she couldn't even whisper a reason to anyone else. No, all she could do was continue on. Regardless of what he might think of her actions, she would make sure to serve him to the best of her abilities. Under the cover of darkness, her face turned red and tears welled up in her eyes, unable to be held back. They had now reached the bottom of the black canyon, with towering rock walls on either side blocking out the stars and intensifying the surrounding darkness. The young Mexican girl seemed to have the eyes of a cat or some instinct of the wild, slowly yet surely feeling her way forward, alert to every nerve, occasionally pausing to listen to unfamiliar nighttime sounds. It was a strange and eerie journey, where the nerves tingled at unfamiliar shapes and the echoes of mountain voices. At one point, during a moment of continued suspense, Alyssa leaned forward and whispered a sentence into her ear. The girl startled, impulsively pressing her lips against Alyssa's hand that gripped the pony's mane. "No, no, miss," she said softly. "Not that. Not because he loves me, because he asked me that. Yes, I won't make him regret it." Alyssa recalled the massive rock overhead around which the faint trail circled as it ascended towards where the little Yankee stood against the horizon. Unfazed by the narrowness of the ledge, the willing and sure-footed Mustang began to climb the steep slope. Step by step, they cautiously advanced from the depths of the crevice, following a winding path through bewildering cedars and skirting unknown ravines. Mercedes was breathing heavily, her free hand clutching her trailing skirt that hindered her ascent. Miss Ornish, from her higher perch on the pony's back, glanced behind nervously. Far away to the east, a faint, uncertain hint of gray was blending into the sky. Suddenly a detached stone rattled in their path. There echoed the sharp click of a rifle hammer, mixed with the sound of a gruff, unfamiliar voice. "You take another step and I'll blow hell out of you, understand?" It all happened so quickly that neither spoke. They held their breath and waited in anticipation. A shadow, vague and undefined, seemed to take shape ahead of them. "Well, can't you speak?" asked the same voice growlingly. "What are you doing on this trail?" Mercedes released the pony's reins and leaned forward eagerly. "Is that you, Bill Hicks?" she asked uncertainly. The man cursed, the butt of his quickly lowered rifle striking sharply against the rock at his feet. "I'll be damned if it isn't that Mexican again," he exclaimed angrily. "Now you get out of here, do you hear me? I won't shoot at a woman, but you pulled one sneaky trick on this group, and I won't tolerate another if I have to throw you into the canyon. So you get out of here, and tell your friend Farnham he better take better care of his women or some of them might get hurt." There was the harsh crunch of a footstep in the darkness. Another figure suddenly slid down the smooth surface of rock, dropping almost at the pony's head. The animal shied with a quick leap, but a firm hand held him still. "Yeah, you shut up, Bill." and the imposing figure of Stutter Brown appeared directly between them and that threatening rifle. I think I'll take part in this game. She's not a spy for Farnham, or I'm a liar." He touched her gently with his large hand, bending down to look into her face, partially hidden beneath the tousled black hair. "Hey, little girl, what's up?" She didn't reply, her lips trembling as if suddenly unable to speak. Alyssa Ornish dismounted from the pony and stood with one hand on Mercedes's shoulder. "She just came to show me the way," she explained boldly. "I have a really important message for Mr. Carlton. Where is he?" "Important, did you say?" "Yes, it's a matter of life or death. Please take me to him." For a brief, suspenseful moment, Brown hesitated, his eyes fixed on the girl's hopeful face, clearly questioning her true intentions. "I can't right now, miss," he finally admitted solemnly. "That's the truth. You see, he's down the II Independence mine shaft." Chapter 14. It was a bold scheme that had taken Ned Carlton down the shaft of the Independence mine during the late-night shift. Even though he was a young engineer, his professional enthusiasm alone couldn't justify such a massive risk. However, this battle between right and wrong had turned into a personal struggle between him and Farnham. Without fully understanding why, he believed that the real stakes were worth the venture and would ultimately be more valuable to him than resolving the mere mining disputes. For several hours he had been underground in the tunnel of the Little Yankee, measuring distances and assessing the quality of the ore. Throughout the afternoon and into the early night, he carefully explored the surface ledges. Under the cover of the low-growing cedars, he approached as stealthily as a vigilant security guard, getting as close as possible to the large ore dump of the busy Independence. He diligently studied their labor system, gradually forming his plan of action. He was already morally convinced that the Farnham team was actively stealing ore from the Little Yankee. They were tunneling along its vein in a systematic manner, fully aware of the risk of being caught. His surveying techniques, the characteristics of the ore deposits, the muffled sound of picks, clearly audible in the silent depths of the Little Yankee, while he lay listening with his ear pressed against the rock, as well as the tight secrecy, all combined to fully convince him of the fact. However, these vague suspicions were completely useless. He needed indisputable, convincing evidence, and he could only obtain such evidence at the bottom of the Independence mine shaft. He discussed the situation openly with his two partners in the small one-room cabin situated on the cliff's edge, while the obedient but grumbling Mike stood solemnly on the pile of discarded rocks outside, armed with a rifle. Gradually, the three conspirators devised a fairly plausible plan. There were numerous opportunities for failure, but the audacity of the plan itself was an advantage. Carlton, his face slightly disguised and dressed in the rugged attire of a typical miner, would conceal himself by the footpath that led from the Independence bunkhouse to the shaft. If one of the men happened to lag behind the others during the midnight shift change, Brown would silently attend to him, relying solely on his immense strength to prevent any alarm. Meanwhile, Carlton would swiftly take the vacated position among the descending workers. By some stroke of luck, this crudely devised scheme worked flawlessly. A drowsy fool, struggling to put on his coat as he blindly chased after the others, tripped on the rocky path and fell heavily. Almost immediately, Stutter Brown had him by the throat, dragging him back into the safety of the cedar trees, while Carlton, holding a lamp and a lunch pail, edged his way into the crowded elevator cage, his face turned towards the pitch-black wall. That had occurred 5 hours earlier. At the very edge of the dark hiding bushes, within easy gun range of the Independence mine building, Hicks and Brown lay flat on the ground, waiting and watching for an opportunity to get involved. Back behind the small cabin, old Mike sat calmly smoking his black pipe, seemingly completely unaware of everything around him except for the bound and cursing Swede he was carefully watching, and whose spirits he occasionally lifted with some choice pieces of Irish wisdom. Under the bright glow of several gasoline torches, half a dozen men constantly passed back and forth between the mine building and the pile of waste rock, casting strange shadows along the rough wooden planks, and occasionally calling out to each other, their rough voices clear in the quiet night. Every now and then, those two silent observers could hear the sad clank of the winch chain and a clatter of ore on the rock pile when the large buckets were raised to the surface and emptied of their spoil. Once, it must have been after 3 o'clock, other men suddenly seemed to mix among those sweating surface workers, and the unmistakable sound of a horse's neigh came faintly from the darkness of a distant thicket. The two men hiding in the bushes rose to their knees, leaning forward anxiously. Brown pulled back the trigger of his rifle, while Hicks angrily muttered under his breath. But those new figures disappeared in some mysterious way before either could determine who they might be, whether inside the mine building or beyond, where darker shadows loomed. The two observers sank back into their hiding spot, silently waiting, always wondering what was happening beyond their knowledge, deep inside the hill. Some of this even Carlton never knew, although he was a part of it. He had descended with the cage, standing silently among the dirty workers crowding it, and quickly understanding from their conversation that they were mostly Swedish and Polish, of a group inclined to ask few questions, as long as they were paid promptly. There was an abandoned hallway opening from the shaft hole about 40 feet below the surface. He saw the reflection of light shimmering along its wall as they passed, but the elevator descended to a much lower level before coming to a halt, and the men stepped out into the dark entrance. Carlton went with them, making sure to stay away from the man he assumed was the gang's leader, and lagging behind, pretending to struggle with lighting his lamp, until the others had walked ahead for some distance along the echoing hallway. The bright yellow glow of their lights in the pitch blackness served as both guidance and warning, so he cautiously moved forward, counting his steps, his hand tracing the outline of the side wall, his lamp unlit. The floor was rough and uneven but dry, suggesting that the tunnel had been blasted through solid rock, as there were no visible supports for the roof. For a considerable distance, this entrance ran straight south from the bottom of the shaft, leading deep into the heart of the mountain. Then those flickering lights in the distance suddenly disappeared, and Carlton blindly continued forward until he came across a sharp bend in the tunnel. He paused for a moment behind the protection of that rocky corner, struck a safety match, and held the small flame close to his pocket compass. Exactly. This new passage continued in a southeast by east direction. He extinguished the glowing match between his fingers, crossed over to the opposite side, and cautiously rounded the corner to where he could once again see the twinkling lights ahead. His foot encountered an obstacle on the floor, and he bent down, feeling for it in the darkness with his fingers. It turned out to be a crude scrap iron rail, evidence that they transported their ore using mules and a tramcar. A few yards further along, this new tunnel started to incline slightly, and he once again mysteriously lost sight of the miner's lamps, forcing him to carefully feel his way forward, counting his steps. The ceiling lowered as he progressed until he had to stoop. The sound of picks striking the rock reached him, faint but growing clearer with each passing moment. He reached another bend in the tunnel and crouched down on one knee, cautiously peering around the corner to see what was happening ahead. The scattered lights on the miners' helmets illuminated the eerie scene. There were 2 narrow passages branching off from the main gallery, only about 30 feet away from where he lay. One seemed to head mostly east of south, while the other went directly eastward. Along the first tunnel there was no attempt at hiding, as the twinkling lights revealed numerous miners already hard at work. However, the second tunnel was dark, and would have gone unnoticed if it weren't for several men gathered in front of the entrance, their bright lamps reflecting off the rocky wall. Carlton's eyes lit up, his heart raced as he observed their task. They were laboriously removing a heavy cover made of wood and canvas that had been cleverly fitted over the opening, making it blend in with the solid rock. 4 workers were engaged in this task, while the foreman, a profane-spoken Irishman with a bristling red mustache, stood slightly back, loudly directing the operation, the yellow light flickering on him. The rest of the group had mostly moved further down, although the sound of their busy picks could still be heard. "Where the hell is Swanson?" the foreman exclaimed suddenly. "He's supposed to be in this crew. Hey, Ole, what happened to Nelson Swanson?" The person being addressed wiped their mouth and straightened up a bit to respond. "I don't know, Mr. Burke. He doesn't seem to be here." Not here, no, I definitely agree, you lazy-eyed Swede. But I swear he came down in the elevator with us because I counted all of you. Don't any of you guys know where that drunkard went?" There was a collective shaking of heads, causing the lights to flicker and cast eerie shadows in the darkness. The annoyed supervisor cursed out loud, his eyes scanning the tunnel. "He's probably still drunk and passed out somewhere in the back of the passage," he growled angrily. "By all powers, I'll teach that useless idiot a lesson today that he won't forget for a while. I swear, or my name isn't Jack Burke. Hey, Peterson, give me that pick handle." He sharply hit the sturdy wooden handle against the wall to test its strength, his unattractive red mustache bristling. "Leave the support structure where it is until I come back," he ordered with a commanding gesture. "And you guys go further in and help out with number 1 until I call for you. I swear I'll make that Swanson feel like the whole damn mountain has collapsed on him. That lazy, drunken Swede." With the heavy pick handle swinging in his hand and his angry red face illuminated by the flickering lamp attached to his hat, the irate Burke briskly walked back into the dim passage, muttering gruffly. Chapter 15. Carlton jumped up and quickly made his way back through the empty tunnel, crouching to avoid hitting his head on the slanted ceiling. He tried to move as fast as possible, but without making any noise. The pitch-black darkness made it impossible to see, but he used one hand to feel the wall and keep himself safe. For a moment, the astonishing surprise of this new situation left his mind in a whirl of uncertainty. He couldn't recall any place where he could hope to hide himself safely. The stone wall of that narrow passage provided no possible concealment against the reflection of the supervisor's glaring flashlight. But he needed to get out of sight, and hearing of those others before the unavoidable encounter and the likely confrontation took place. This became the one persistent thought that drove him back into the darkness, recklessly accepting every chance of encountering obstacles in his haste. At the second turn, he paused, breathing heavily from the excitement of his intense sprint, and leaned against the rock, anxiously peering back at the rapidly approaching flicker of light. The enraged supervisor came stomping angrily along, his heavy boots echoing on the hard ground, the wooden club in his hand occasionally striking against the wall, as if he already imagined himself beating the disobedient Swanson. Around him, casting a giant shadow and distorting his figure, the yellow glow of the flashlight illuminated in ghostly hues. Carlton clenched his teeth with determination and silently cocked his gun. The man was nearly upon him, a dark, formless mass resembling an unreal shadow. Then the younger man stepped suddenly into the open, the two facing each other. The startled supervisor stared in disbelief, leaning forward as if confronted by a ghost, his teeth showing between parted lips. "Drop that club," commanded Carlton coldly, the glint of a raised steel barrel in the other man's eyes. "Quickly, my man, this gun has a sensitive trigger." "What the hell? Drop that club. We'll discuss this matter later." "No, raise your hands, both of them. Turn around slowly. Ah, I see you don't carry a gun down here. So much better, because now we can get down to business without wasting time." He kicked the released pick handle to the side, out of sight in the darkness, keeping his watchful eyes fixed on the Irishman's face. Burke stood, spewing curses, his hands raised in surrender, his angry face flushed red. The flickering light cast a surreal and darkly humorous scene. "Who the devil are you?" The surprised man leaned forward, trying to get a clearer view of the other person's features in the flame's light. Carlton pulled the brim of his miner's cap lower. "That won't matter much to you, Jack Burke," he said calmly, "if I have to use this arsenal. However, if you stay calm, I'll be happy to provide you with all the necessary information. Let's say, for example, that I'm someone Biff Farnham wants to sell some stock in this mine to. Intrigued, I decide to see its true value for myself and come down during the night shift. Seems like a reasonable thing to do, right? Now, in such circumstances, I assume you, as the foreman, would be more than willing to show me exactly what's happening down here?" He paused, his lips forming a pleasant smile, and Burke stared at him, his mouth agape, his eyes mere slits in the darkness. It took him a full minute to regain control of his voice. "You think I'm a damn fool?" he croaked hoarsely. "No, that's exactly what I don't think, Burke," Carlton replied, smiling once more beneath his stern gray eyes. "That's precisely why I know you'll show me everything I want to see. A complete idiot might be tempted to take risks with this gun and get injured, but you are intelligent enough to understand that I have complete control and mean business." These words were spoken slowly and intentionally, causing the foreman to involuntarily close his eyes as if feeling them physically, his uplifted hands clenched. "What is it that you want to see?" "That tunnel you have hidden with false work." Burke spat on the rock wall, sweat appearing on his forehead, but his stubborn Irish nature made him resistant. "Who told you that lie? Surely you won't find anything like that here, my friend." Carlton looked at him with disdain. "You're lying, Burke. I saw it with my own eyes just beyond that second turn over there. You can't deceive me, and the sooner you understand that, the better. Now you have a choice. Follow my orders and keep your men away, or face the consequences. It's one or the other within the next 60 seconds. Turn around." No sane person would ever doubt the determined intent behind those few quietly spoken, sincere words. Whoever this man may be, whatever his purpose, he certainly wasn't there for fun, and Burke turned around as if controlled by a hidden mechanism. "Good," Carlton commented briefly. "You can lower your hands. Now walk straight ahead, only speaking when I tell you to, and never forget that there is a gun pointed at your back. The slightest hint of treachery, and with God's help, Burke, I'll unleash every bullet into your body. I don't want to do it, but I will." They proceeded slowly along the empty tunnel, resembling two prisoners in step. Burke grumbled sullenly, a large, indistinct figure under the light on his hat. Carlton remained alert, silent, vigilant for any signs of treachery, the lamplight illuminating his stern face. Their shadows moved fluidly, constantly changing shape, along the walls, their footsteps echoing hollowly in the corridor. No unnecessary words were spoken to give orders or explanations. Undoubtedly, the supervisor had a good understanding of the intentions of this unknown intruder. However, he also recognized that the man had not taken such a risk of being discovered lightly. Having spent enough time among desperate individuals, he fully grasped the gravity of a loaded gun and its implications when wielded by a cold and determined individual. The persuasive power of the drop was more than enough to ensure compliance. Farnham could go to hell. At that moment, he had little desire to die for Farnham's sake. Carlton, skilled in assessing people, easily perceived this mindset in his captive, his eyes smiling in appreciation of the other's quick response, while never wavering and keeping his hand firmly on guard. Burke was now safe, but he was not to be underestimated or trusted for even a moment in this high-stakes game. They paused at the corner as the engineer cautiously surveyed the dimly lit area ahead. There was little sign of activity, except for the faint glow of moving lights down the first tunnel. Burke stood silently and sullenly, not daring to make a move without a command. "Anyone in that other passage?" The supervisor shook his head without even turning around, his jaws steadily working on the tobacco that bulged in his cheek. "Then lead the way." Carlton extended his unused left hand as they advanced, his fingers gliding along the wall, his observant eyes occasionally shifting from his prisoner's broad back to the sides and ceiling of the tunnel. Based on his experience, it was clear that this initial excavation had been made through solid rock, not following any natural seam, but rather cutting across it. Here, there was plenty of evidence indicating a deliberate and skillfully planned act of theft. He stopped Burke, gripping his shoulder with one hand. "Are you guys following a lead or back there?" he asked sharply. The Irishman squirmed, glancing back at his questioner. He saw nothing in that face to give him any encouragement to lie. "Sure," he replied gruffly. "We're following it all the way down that number 1. What's the nature of the ore body?" "It's a bit low grade with a bit of copper, and the vein isn't very thick." "How far have you had to dig across here before finding any ore?" "About 30 feet of rock work." "Keep going, you thief," commanded the engineer, his jaw setting threateningly. It turned out to be a very irregular passage, with the top varying in height, clearly indicating numerous faults in the vein, although none of these were serious enough to require solving any difficult mining problems. Despite the twists and turns, the general direction could be easily determined. The walls seemed to be made of some soft stone, somewhat disintegrated by the introduction of air, and the engineer quickly understood that only a pick and lever had been needed to dislodge the layers of ore. At the far end of this tunnel, the pile of broken rock scattered about clearly indicated recent work, although no discarded mining tools were visible. Carlton examined the exposed ore vein, now clearly revealed by Burke's flickering lamp, and put a few detached specimens into his pocket. Then he sat down on a protruding rock, the gun still shining in his hand, and ordered the sullen foreman to sit opposite him. The yellow light from the lamp sparkled brightly on the rock, casting its brightness across the faces of the two men. For a moment the silence was so intense they could hear water dripping somewhere in the distance. "Burke," the engineer suddenly asked, "how long have you guys been in here?" The uneasy Irishman shifted his tobacco, apparently considering whether to tell the truth or take the risk of lying. Something in Carlton's face must have convinced him against the suggested falsehood. "Well, sir, I've only been in charge of this crew for about 3 months," he said slowly, "and they were well into this vein by then. How deep are we down?" "Between 60 and 70 feet, counting it at the shaft." "And how long is this tunnel?" 146 feet from the rock over there." Carlton's gray eyes, serious with thought, were focused on the man's face, but the other kept his own hidden, lowered to the rock floor. "Who planned out this work, do you know? Who did the engineering?" "I think it was the old man himself. Anyway, that's what those Swedes say." Carlton took a deep breath. Well, he knew what he was doing for sure. "It's a well-done job," he admitted, a sudden hint of admiration in his voice. His gaze drifted towards the dull sparkle of the exposed ore. "I suppose you know who all this rightfully belongs to, don't you, Burke?" The foreman spat thoughtfully into the darkness, a grim smile bristling his red mustache. "Well, sir, I'm not much into thinking," he replied calmly. "If it's those deeds you're after, maybe you should talk to Farnham. He's the one who handles that part of it for this company. I'm just overseeing my crew during working hours and spending the rest of the time in the bunkhouse. I couldn't care less who owns the rock." The two men sat in silence, Burke nonchalantly chewing on his tobacco. Carlton shifted the gun into his left hand and began slowly drawing lines and marking distances on the back of an old envelope. The motionless foreman watched him intently through partially closed eyes, holding the lamp in his hat perfectly steady. Slowly, without any other movement, both of his hands crept upward along his body, inch by inch reaching for a higher position without arousing suspicion. His partially hidden eyes, as alert as a cat's, shone with intense excitement beneath his hat brim, never leaving Carlton's face, which was slightly lowered. Then, out of nowhere, his hands swiftly clapped together, enclosing the flickering flame of the lamp. Chapter 16. Burke was well aware that attempting to run would be futile in the midst of such blinding darkness. 3 steps would only result in him colliding with an unforgiving rock. Immediately he clamped his teeth together like a bulldog and latched onto Carlton's throat, relying on his immense strength for victory. Instinctively, similar to how one shuts their eyes to avoid harm without knowing why, the engineer sidestepped, causing Burke's gripping fingers to miss their intended target. As a result, the two men tumbled down together in a desperate struggle. In the initial force of the attack, Burke's revolver was knocked from his hand, and Carlton's cheek bled from forcefully hitting a sharp rock edge. However, Carlton fought back with silent ferocity, using one hand to restrain Burke's searching fingers, while the other firmly grasped the soft collar of his opponent's shirt. Burke struck out heavily twice, landing powerful punches on Carlton's body but unable to reach his protected face. Finally, Carlton managed to firmly brace one foot against a rocky surface, swiftly flipping the surprised miner onto his back with such force that it elicited a loud sob. A desperate and merciless struggle ensued, with their arms locked in a frenzy, bodies straining and feet scraping against loose stones. Muttered curses and the dull thud of blows filled the air. Neither man could see the other, nor could they be certain their opponent was unarmed. Nevertheless, they fought furiously, with Burke consumed by rage and lacking mercy, while Carlton was intoxicated by the thrill of the fight. They changed positions twice, with the agility of one compensating for the brawny strength of the other. Their muscles strained, and hot breath escaped through clenched teeth. Pain was numb, and mercy was non-existent. In the midst of the chaotic brawl, driven by some primal instinct, Carlton desperately clutched the Irishman's hair, forcefully pushing him against the uneven rock floor. Suddenly, Burke went limp, and the engineer, panting in pain, lay sprawled over him, his entire body trembling, barely aware that he had emerged victorious. The miner remained motionless, seemingly no longer breathing, and Carlton, recoiling from contact with the lifeless body, grabbed onto a rock for support and pulled himself upright. The profound darkness surrounding him disoriented him. He had no sense of which way to go, and could barely recall his location. His battered and strained body throbbed with pain. His head pulsed as if with a fever. Gradually his exhausted breath returned, along with a slow realization of his predicament. Had he killed Burke? He peered down towards where he knew the body lay, but could see nothing. The enigma of the darkness suddenly overwhelmed him. He could feel his hands trembling violently as he cautiously felt along the smooth surface of the rock. He felt a shrinking, anxious dread of making contact with the man lying there beneath the shroud of blackness, that horrifying, silent figure, perhaps slain by his own hands. It was a rebellion of the soul. For a moment he genuinely believed he was losing his sanity, feverish delusions toying with his strained and anguished sight, his imagination populating the inky void with a multitude of grotesque figures. Slowly and sternly he regained control of himself, his jaw clenched, his tingling nerves subdued by the unwavering force of a awakened determination. Forcing himself into action, he bent down, groping along the ground for the foreman's hat with the extinguished lamp affixed to it. It took him a while to locate his target, yet the persistent effort restored a considerable amount of self-restraint and granted him a certain clarity of perception. He held the recovered lamp in his hands, leaning against the side of the tunnel, listening. The absolute silence seemed to press against him from every direction, as if it had weight. He was still breathing heavily, but his strained ears couldn't pick up any sound where he knew Burke lay hidden in the darkness. Nothing reached him to break the dreadful, eerie silence, except for the distant, solitary sound of dripping water. He hesitated, match in hand, feeling childish fear of what he was about to reveal. But why should he? The struggle had been fierce, but he had only fought back to protect himself. He had been attacked, and his only response had been self-defense. Carlton didn't harbor any animosity. Now that the intense combat was over, he dreaded the thought that he might have taken a human life through his savagery. The tiny flame from the match played across his pale face, caught the lamp's wick, and flickered into faint light in the darkness. Burke, huddled in the shadow of the rocks, remained motionless, and the concerned engineer bent over his still body in a horrifying fear. The man was partially leaning on one side, his hands still clenched as if in a struggle, and a nasty wound caused by a sharp rock edge was clearly visible on the side of his head. Blood had flowed and stained the stone beneath, but it was already starting to clot among the thick hair, somewhat concealing the severity of the injury. Carlton, with his head lowered against the other man's chest, felt confident that he detected breath, even a slight involuntary twitching of muscles. He quickly stood up, his mind racing with ideas. The foreman was still alive, perhaps not even seriously injured if help arrived promptly. But what could he do? What should he try to do? In his current physical state, Carlton realized that it was completely impossible to transport that bulky body. Water might revive him, but the faint trickle of falling drops likely originated from some distant crack in the rock, which would take a lot of patient searching to find. The engineer had taken serious risks in this underground venture. In this moment of triumph, he didn't feel inclined to give up his information or sacrifice himself in any idealistic devotion to his attacker. However, he had to give the man a fair chance. There seemed to be only one feasible option: sending some of the workers from Number 1 to assist the helpless man. But could he do this without risking his own discovery? Without immediately revealing his involvement in the tragedy? First and foremost, he had to ensure his own safety. He had to reach the surface before the truth became known. Almost automatically, he picked up his pistol from the floor where it was gleaming and stood staring at the motionless figure, slowly formulating a plan of action. Gradually it took shape in his mind. The missing miner's name was Swanson, the one Burke had gone back to find. Undoubtedly he was a Swede, and from the brief glimpse he had of the man before Brown tackled him on the path above, he was a solidly built individual, clumsily irritated. Most likely such a person would have a deep, hoarse voice from the dampness of long hours working underground. Well, he might not succeed in perfectly imitating that, but he could mimic a Swedish accent, and amidst the chaos and darkness, rely on luck. Let's see. Burke had certainly called one of those miners over there Ole, and another Peterson. It would probably help to throw them off guard to hear their own names spoken, and they would naturally expect Swanson to be with the foreman. It seemed like a viable plan, and certainly the only option available. It had to be taken, sooner rather than later. The idea never even crossed his mind that he would harm an innocent man in this way. He glanced once more at the lifeless body of Burke, then held the flashlight in front of him, and cautiously made his way down the passage towards the main tunnel. Partially hiding in the darker shadows behind the displaced scaffolding, he could safely observe the entrance to number 1, where he saw several figures moving around under the flickering lights. He could also hear voices amidst the sounds of pickaxes striking the ground. He moved closer, shielding his flashlight with his hands and crouching uncomfortably in the shadows. The group of men closest to him were clearly Swedes, as they conversed in that language and worked methodically in the boss's absence. Carlton stood up, his silhouette becoming visible on the rock wall, one hand covering his mouth to muffle his voice. The echoing emptiness of the underground caverns made it difficult to discern any sound. "Just 2 of you guys better come over here and lend a hand," he said uncertainly. The faces nearer to the tunnel turned towards the voice in sudden confusion, the lights flickering as they raised their heads. "Was it you, Nell Swanson?" "Yes, I think so. I just need Peterson and Ole. Mr. Burke got injured on the new level, and I couldn't leave him alone." He saw the 2 men immediately respond, dropping their tools and making their way towards him, their heavy boots crunching on the floor, their hat brims concealing their eyes and casting shadows on their faces. For a moment he stayed by the scaffolding, allowing the light from his flashlight to guide them like a beacon. Then he concealed the small flame within his hat and ran swiftly down the main tunnel. Confident now in Burke's early rescue, he must seize this opportunity for an immediate escape from the mine. 100 feet from the base of the shaft, he suddenly came across the approaching tram car, a small mule pulling lazily on the rope reins, a boy clinging on at the back. The 2 locked eyes through the smoke of a flickering wick. "Hurry up," Carlton said sharply. "Burke is injured, and they'll need your car to transport him out. What's the signal for the elevator?" The boy stood silent, his mouth wide open, staring at him dumbfounded. "Do you hear me, you dimwit? I need a doctor. How do you signal the elevator?" "2 tugs on the cord, sir," came the begrudging reply. "Who are you, anyway?" But Carlton, ignoring the question, was already off, his only concern being to quickly reach the surface safely before an alarm was raised. The elevator shot rapidly upwards through the pitch darkness, past the deserted 40-foot corridor, and emerged into the pale light of dawn flooding the mine shaft building. Squinting after those long hours spent in darkness below, Carlton vaguely made out a group of unfamiliar figures before him. For a moment he hesitated in uncertainty, his hand shielding his eyes. Then, as he stepped forward almost blindly, he suddenly came face to face with Biff Farnham. Their gazes met, both equally startled, bewildered, doubtful. Then the gambler's jaw clenched, his hand swiftly dropping to his side, and Carlton, putting all his strength into a swift punch, struck him squarely between the eyes. Farnham fell over as if shot, yet before he even hit the ground, Carlton had leaped over the staggering body and rushed, stumbling and falling, down the steep slope of the refuse pile, crashing headfirst into the thick underbrush below. Chapter 17. In the enchantment of an instant, 12 furious individuals emerged from the mine entrance, their firearms resoundingly firing amidst their profane invectives. Beyond, on the outskirts of their dark hiding place, Hicks and Brown eagerly rose to their knees while their prepared rifles fired back swiftly, not all of it wasted. But Carlton had disappeared into the green foliage as if he had plunged into the ocean. When he finally emerged, it was behind the protective shrubs, his clothes torn and his breath heavy with exhaustion. Brown, still under the spell of battle, did not look away, his eyes fixed on the barrel of his rifle. However, Hicks jumped up with enthusiasm, emitting a growl of warm welcome. "Damn it," he exclaimed, his eyes sparkling with admiration. "You're truly remarkable." The engineer smiled, pressing his hand against his side. "Maybe I am," he gasped, "but right now I'm extremely worn out. That was quite an intense experience, and I need to eat and rest." Hicks shaded his forehead, leaning on his rifle. "Sometimes I think my vision isn't as sharp as it used to be," he explained regretfully. "I fired 5 shots at that pathetic group over there just now, and didn't see a single one of them react as if they were hit. They appear blurry to me from this distance. Say, Stutter, what's happening over there now anyway?" Brown wiped his face deliberately, struggling to gather his thoughts. "There's not much of anything as far as I can see," he replied solemnly. "A couple of guys with guns hiding behind the pile of rubbish. I shot 2 of them from behind the mine shaft. They're probably injured. I reckon I got both of them. You really should wear glasses, Bill." Hicks stared at his partner, his gray beard sticking out, showing his teeth. "So you got them, huh?" he retorted angrily. "Oh, you're lightning fast, Stutter. You're the original sharpshooter, you tall, stuttering fool. You're crowing like a rooster that has just found its voice. Now listen here. I think it's intelligence that's going to get us out of this situation, and I'll definitely have to provide most of that because you don't seem to have any to spare as far as I can tell." "Shoot." "Well, yes, you can shoot just fine and have relationships with Mexicans, but once that's done, you're all worn out. That's when old Bill Hicks has to do the thinking and make things right. Goodness, you really tire me out." The old man looked out across the empty space towards the seemingly deserted dump, the anger slowly fading from his eyes. "I suppose, gentlemen, it will take those guys a while to recover from the sudden shock we've given them," he continued. "Maybe we should take this rest period to get something to eat and discuss how we're prepared for when the action starts again. Those guys won't be satisfied until they get another beating, and there's bound to be a lot of shooting before the night is over. Once they gather their strength and realize the significance of all this, they'll definitely be a hostile bunch." Behind the protective cover of the low-growing cedars, the 3 men walked slowly towards the cabin of the Little Yankee, seemingly completely unaware of any danger lurking behind. As they moved forward, Carlton briefly recounted his discoveries in the lower levels of the Independence, mentioning his personal adventures only as necessary for the simple narrative. Brown, his rifle held casually, his young face serious with thought, made no outward comments, but Hicks burst out with words of enthusiastic praise. "By golly, are you sure that was Farnham you hit?" he exclaimed, his aged eyes shining with admiration. "Darn it, Stutter, what do you think of that? Punched him before he could even draw his gun. Never heard of such a miracle in this camp before. Why, Lord, that guy is faster than lightning. I've seen him unleash his skills more than once." I reckon he won't be very likely to let up on you now, Mr. Carlton," added the young giant cautiously. "He ain't the kind to forget such a deal." "Him let up? Hell!" And Hicks suddenly stopped and stared behind. "He'll never let up on anything, that guy. He'll be after us for sure, as soon as he catches his breath, and Carlton here is going to get in trouble for tonight's chaos if Farnham ever manages to catch him off guard. He has no mercy, just like a tiger. You can bet on that, boys. He'll get all of us if he can, because he knows his little game is over if he doesn't, but he'll make sure to target Carlton anyway." "Did you gather any evidence while you were down there?" "Yes, I have the plans in detail. My measurements may not be exact, but they are close enough, and I would be willing to testify to them." "Good job. That means we have them cornered. They're still keeping quiet over there, aren't they, Stutter?" "Well, let's have our meal out here in the open where we can keep an eye out, and while we eat, we'll discuss what we should do next." The kitchen of the Little Yankee was located outdoors, a small opening in the bluff serving as a natural fireplace, while a narrow crack between rocks acted as a chimney, carrying away the smoke. The preparation of a simple meal under such primitive conditions was quickly completed, with the menu being modest and the service basic. Carlton barely had time to wash his hands and face and hurriedly change out of his dirty work clothes into his original suit when Hicks announced that the food was ready and suggested they begin eating promptly. The dining room was a large, flat stone on the very edge of the cliff, elevated enough to have a clear view of the distant mine shaft of the Independence. Hicks brought an extra rifle from the cabin, along with a belt filled with ammunition, which he solemnly handed to the engineer. "These gadgets will come in handy pretty soon, I suppose," he remarked meaningfully, and stood calmly on the edge of the rock, holding a powerful pair of binoculars to his eyes. "They've brought the night shift up to the top," he commented finally, "and they're waking up the others in the bunkhouse. Hell will break loose soon. About half of them fellows are carrying guns, too. Ah, just as I thought, there goes a guy on horseback racing down the trail, probably looking for more troublemakers. Well, the more the merrier, as the old cat said when she counted her kittens. Damned if they don't have a proper battle line formed along the gulch over there. You can bet your bottom dollar they mean business for sure, Stutter, my old buddy." Brown, deliberately pouring the coffee, settled for a small grunt and a quick look in the indicated direction. Hicks slowly put away his binoculars and comfortably sat on the edge of the rock. Carlton, already eating but noticeably worried, glanced at the two impassive faces with curiosity. "You both don't seem to be very concerned about the situation," he finally said. "If you truly expect an attack from those guys over there, shouldn't we be preparing some defense?" Hicks looked over at him over the rim of his metal cup. "Defense? Hell. Our defense is right here, the four of us, including Mike." "Where is Mike?" "Oh, out there in the backyard, entertaining that Swedish guy you brought in as a plaything for him. It seems like all these foreigners are getting quite friendly lately. You're making friends with Mexicans and Mike with Swedes. I guess I'll have to start looking for a Native American, or else I'll have to handle things on my own pretty soon." Brown, his freckled face flushed with heat, his eyes becoming hardened, struck the rock with a clenched fist. "Damn you, Bill," he stuttered desperately, his large chest heaving. I've had just enough of that kind of talk. You say another word about her, and there will be something else happening." Old Hicks laughed, his gray goatee wagging, yet it was clear that he understood his partner's temper and knew his patience had its limits. "Oh, I'll let it go," he confessed amiably. "Lord, I had a touch of that same disease once myself. But there's no sense in you fighting me, Stutter. I bet you'll get enough practice soon enough, unless those black eyes of hers are very deceiving. But that can wait. Right now, we have a few other points to consider. You were asking about our defense, Mr. Carlton, when this lovesick kid interrupted?" "Yes. Well, it's the lay of the land and 4 good rifles. That's all there is to it. Those guys over there can't get in, and I'll be damned if we can get out. Whichever party gets tired first is the one that's going to get defeated." "I don't quite understand, Hicks. Do you mean you suggest enduring a siege?" "Don't see anything else to do." And the man's half-closed eyes glanced around questioningly. "We're not strong enough to attack. Farnham has more than 5 men to our 1 over there right now. He sent a rider into San Juan for another group of troublemakers. We've gathered the evidence, and we have the law on our side to send him to prison. Sure, there's no doubt about it. He knows it. And he knows furthermore that there's no way out for him except to eliminate us before we can ever get to the courts. That's his plan right now. Do you think Mr. Biff Farnham, under those circumstances, is likely to act like a child? Not to a great extent, let me tell you. He isn't built that way. Besides, he hates me like poison. I reckon by this time he doesn't harbor any great love for you, and you bet he intends to get us before we can complain, even if he has to raise the whole damn mountain. Anyway, that's how it looks to me and Stutter here. What was it you were going to advise, Mr. Carlton?" The engineer set down his aluminum coffee cup. "The immediate dispatching of a messenger to San Juan, the swearing out of a warrant for Farnham on a criminal charge, and getting the sheriff up here with a group." Hicks smiled grimly, his gaze wandering over toward Stutter, who sat staring wide-eyed at the engineer. "You're a young man, sir, and I rather think you don't exactly understand the exact situation out here in Echo Canyon," he admitted seriously. "I'm law-abiding and all that, Law is all right in its place and where it can be enforced. But Echo Canyon isn't Denver, and out here the rifle and occasionally a chunk of dynamite has to be considered before the courts get any chance to review the evidence. It's generally lead first, and lawyers later. That's what makes the game interesting, and gives such fellows as Farnham a run for their money. Well, right now we have the law and the evidence on our side, but damn the luck, those other guys have the rifles. It's his move first, and it kind of seems to me as if the man knows how to handle his cards. He's not a bluffer either. Just take a look through those binoculars down the trail and tell me what you see. Carlton did so, standing up, standing at the edge of the rock hanging over the valley. Well, can you see anything in particular? There is a small group of men gathered near the large rock. Exactly. Well, those fellows aren't there just for their health. There are 3 more of the same kind hiding in the bushes where the path splits towards Independence, and another group further down by the creek. It's easy to talk about the law and sending a messenger to San Juan for the sheriff, but I wouldn't want to be that messenger. He would have quite an exciting time before he arrived there. Farnham is a despicable villain, but he's not a fool. He has trapped us here, and the cork is firmly in place. Do you mean we are powerless? Well, not exactly. Not as long as we have enough food and ammunition. I'm just suggesting that this problem needs to be resolved with good, honest fighting before any courts have a chance to get involved. We don't have time to deal with lawyers right now. In Echo Canyon, force is the deciding factor, and we're going to handle this on our own. The only thing bothering me is how soon this damn fight is going to start. I reckon those fellows are just waiting for reinforcements. Carlton remained still, observing the 2 men, quickly understanding the key aspects of the situation.